Welcome back to the program. I'm Zev Brenner. With us once again, Ken Abramowitz, chairman of NGN Capital Venture Group, chairman of American Friends of Likud, founder of SaveTheWest.com, and he was in Budapest and Europe doing research for his book on saving the West. Thank you for joining us, Ken. Chag
Sure,
Sameach.
happy to be with you.
Thank you. By the way, when I looked you up on Facebook, I found another one who works for the Right Corporation, and you work for the Right Corporation too. So.
Yeah, so maybe the twins.
Nice to see. So you had a very successful trip. We touched on it briefly last time we spoke. I understand you met with the former Prime Minister of Czechoslovakia.
Yes, which is a real treat. He's 76 years old. He's was their first Prime Minister of the rebuilt, reawakened Czechoslovakia, now Czech Republic, and I never had the honor of meeting him, and we spent a very pleasant hour or so discussing current affairs.
On your Facebook post, you said you'd like to see him back in leadership position.
Well, if there's going to be a EU, I'd like to see someone like that be the president of the EU. He has a clear vision. He's not confused. He's not weak. He's not going to let the culture of Czech Republic, and if he were at the EU, he wouldn't let the culture of the individual countries die. He's very opinionated about how important it is for countries to maintain their culture.
You don't want to check out of politics, is what you're saying.
Right. He's now he's an elder statesman, but I'm sure the people running the EU don't want to hear from him, because he's a mirror image of what they want to do. Essentially, Europe's being invaded by Muslim immigrants. By the way, in general, it's fine to have immigrants, but you can't have immigrants that don't believe in your culture. So you can't allow Muslim immigrants who believe in Sharia law and not your basic laws to invade the country. Also, they're being invaded by Africans. Who, if they're Christian, they can fit in fine. But if they're Muslims, they have the same problem. And so Czech Republic's not letting immigrants in, and neither is Hungary and Poland. And so Eastern Europe's going to survive and thrive. It's Western Europe that I worry about.
You know, I saw an amazing thing a number of years ago, and this is before things got as bad as they are today, that they moved the latrines in British prisons because it was determined it was facing Mecca, so they had to move it to a different direction, which I thought was absurd then, and today it's probably a lot worse in Europe what they're doing to accommodate. Nothing wrong with accommodating religion, but it goes too far.
Well, either the immigrants impose their values on us, or we impose our values on them. So this would be a good example of the prisoners imposing their values on the prison keepers. And so this is a bad message. The message should be, no, you conform to our standards. Since we don't want to do that because it's not nice, it's not pleasant, basically they're imposing their vision on Europe, to a lesser extent in the U.S., but the same phenomenon is happening here or there. It's just Europe is 25 years ahead of us in terms of unimpeded, unvetted immigrants.
But Ken, I think the major problem is not so much that they're doing Sharia law. Let them do Sharia. Listen, religious Jews have Bet Din, have a court of Jewish law. Nothing wrong with that. The problem is when you have neighborhoods and you have groups where they're looking to take over the country, and you have unemployed kids, and you look in England, look in other countries where you have whole neighborhoods that are really people just hanging out, people really derelicts in their duties, not involved in regular society, and you have crime, and you have all this religious hatred, and you have that intolerance, and that I think is where the main danger, because all the terrorist attacks are coming from those that are fundamentalists and are getting an education to hate the countries where they're from. That's, I think, more where the problem lies.
Well, there's two forms of terrorism, according to my definition. There's physical terror and there's cultural terror. So the polls that I've seen indicate that 50% of Muslims come to the U.S., probably to Europe, but let's just say to the U.S., and want to fit in just like my grandparents from Lithuania 100 years ago. But 40% believe in Sharia law and want to impose Sharia law on American Christians. And 10% are physical terrorists or recruiters or complicit with physical terrorists. So the point I'm getting to is we don't want the 10% who are physical terrorists, and we don't want the 40 who are what I call cultural terrorists, but we have no mechanism to separate the 50% who want to accept our rules from the 40% who want us to accept their rules and the 10% who physically want to cause us harm. And until we can figure out how to separate the 40 from the 50 from the 40 and the 10, we basically should adopt the Czech model and Hungarian model, which is essentially no Muslim immigrants until we learn how to vet them. And there is some Israeli technology, by the way, to vet them, but they're not being used. It's not being used in the U.S. So we need to do that first. So Trump was right to have a moratorium on Muslims till we try to figure it out.
But he picked only certain countries, not Muslims. It was against people coming from certain countries where you have a preponderance of terrorism, and that's what I believe he had wanted to put into effect. It didn't completely work out the way he wanted. But the fact is, though, you can have a Muslim come from England that would have no problem getting to the United States. The problem is coming from those countries where there are terrorist cells that are operating on a large basis, whether it's Syria, Iran, countries of that nature. I think that's where the ban was supposed to be put, not just to put a ban on Muslims, period.
Right. No, I agree. That's what he did, and that's a reasonable first step. That's to go after the 10% of Muslims who are physical terrorists. But it doesn't address the issue of the 40% who are cultural terrorists. And the point.
But in a free society, they can do it. But you can say whatever you want to say. But the question is, will governments accede to that? That's really the issue is. And you can say all you want. You can have a party saying that, look, you have all these cults that believe that they're the Messiah, so they exist and operate freely in a democracy, but they have no voice as far as shaping society is concerned.
Sure. But going back to my grandparents 100 years ago, if they could speak English, just pretend, and they talk to the immigration officer at Ellis Island, and they say, we're Jewish, and we hear there's a lot of Christians here, and we're going to impose Judaism on the Christians or kill them. You think they would have, the immigration officer would say, oh, that sounds logical. Sure.
But the average Muslim is not saying we're going to impose Islam or we're going to kill you. The problem is in America, and this we'll pick up, I think, on another week, you have groups like Saudi Arabia that export their Wahhabism, and they're teaching in the schools, including in New York, that Jews and Christians are inferior, they're infidels and all kinds of things, and that's where a problem lies, and they're educating a whole generation of Muslims to hate. And that's where the problem lies. But to have an average Muslim that's a peace-loving Muslim, so, hey, why can't they live in America or in any other country?
Sure, I agree 100%, but that's what I call cultural terrorism. That the mosque, the books, the teachings that are adverse to our culture is I call cultural terrorism. We have no mechanism and no understanding of what to do about that.
Ken, I'm sure we'll have some continued discussions about that. Certainly a good topic. Ken Abramowitz is chairman of NGN Capital Group, chairman of American Friends of Likud, and he's just came back from a tour of Europe where he's doing research for his organization, for his book, SaveTheWest.com. We're going to be right back. Don't go away. Stay tuned.